In this particular video, we're going to look at color correction within Final Cut Pro 10. Primarily, the primary color correction. Now, a primary color correction is a correction that affects the whole picture. And before we do anything with color correction, what we need to do is look at the video scope, so we'll be able to ascertain the brightness and the color values that are within that picture. There's two ways in which we can turn on and off the video scopes to be able to work that out. The first is if we go to the window menu, halfway down there you've got show video scopes, and the keyboard shortcut is Command and 7 if you need it. The second way of being able to access the video scopes is in the top right hand corner of your playback window. You have what looks like a little switch, and it's your viewer display options. If I click on that button, you see within that list I have show video scopes. If I click that, you see it splits the picture. If I just resize my canvas a little bit, it splits the picture into two windows, the video aspect on the side, and on the left hand side is our scopes. At the moment it's showing me my RGB overlay, which I could use, but I'm more used to using the waveform monitor and the vector scope. So let's have a look at the settings drop down menu at the top right of these scopes, and in there we have the ability to turn on and off which element is viewed. So I'm going to have a look at the waveform to start with, because you would adjust your luminance values before you start to look at the color values. The idea behind this is that you would expand your contrast range, which may have an effect on the picture, on the color information within the picture. Sometimes not, but if you expand that contrast range, then you get a little bit more information come in. So if I click on the waveform button here we see our waveform for this particular picture, and the waveform monitor itself is a visual representation of vertical lines straight through the particular picture. So for instance, what we can see here is that we have a scale on the left from 0 to 100, 0 representing the blackest portion of the picture, and 100 representing what should be the whitest portion of the picture, i.e. the brightest portion for broadcast safe levels. So within this picture we can see there's a lot of white information at the top there, there's a lot of black information, but some of it, for instance, if we look in a straight line down here on the left hand side, we see there is a dark bit of information there, but that represents a shadow which isn't quite landing on the 0. So this could do with a little bit of adjusting. One, to make it less bright, because obviously some of the whites are blowing out a little bit there, and two, to bring the black level down a little bit, just to give a little bit more definition in the blacks. Now to do this, we need to get access to the color information panel. And so underneath our video playback window we have an I button here which gives us the inspector. When I click on that, if I select the clip in the timeline that I need to make adjustments to, up here on the right hand side appears the different settings for it. Now you see there's a blue box to show that color adjustments it has been added. It's been analyzed, but it hasn't been adjusted at this point. There's also a correction 1 box underneath, and this is the one we're going to look at. Now at the moment I can turn this little blue button to switch this correction on and off, and it doesn't have an effect on the picture or the waveform because nothing has been adjusted yet. We do have a couple of buttons here to allow us to choose a particular color to affect, or we can draw a vignette, but that's for a secondary color correction. We'll have a look at that later on. Then we have the arrow on the right hand side, and this leads us, if I click on it, into the color correction space. And along the top we have 3 different tabs to allow us to change different elements of this picture: color, saturation, or exposure. And exposure is usually the thing you would look at first. Just underneath here then we have the ability to change the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights, and we have a visual representation down here of what each individual button does. So as it says down here, highlights, white button, that's this button on the right, the midtones in the middle, the shadows on the left, and then you have a global slider that allows you to increase or decrease the brightness or the luminance values for the whole clip. So first things first, we would look at the waveform monitor and think, right, okay, the blacks within this picture could be a little bit darker. So we look at the shadows, and when I click on the shadow button, it allows me to click and drag up or down and this allows me to increase or decrease the brightness information for the darkest portions of the picture. Now the bonus of this is that it split the picture up into the 3 separate brightness values. The darkest portion of the picture, so maybe the darkest 20%, but then a gradual, if you make an adjustment to that portion of the picture, it has a gradual adjustment over the rest of the picture as you get into the lighter areas. The lighter it gets, the less it changes. Equally, on the brightest portions of the picture, for the highlights, if I were to adjust the highlight, it would kind of adjust primarily the top 20% of the brightness values, but then have a gradual decline in effect as it goes through the midtones into the shadows. And then the midtones kind of cover the majority of the middle of the picture. It doesn't affect or has a minor effect on the darkest portions of the picture, a minor effect on the brightest portions of the picture, but the majority of the effects it's going to have is within that middle 60% of the picture. So on this occasion, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the shadows, and we can just move this up and down by clicking on it with the mouse button, and then just dragging up and down. But what we do have the ability to do is, if I click on the button, I can use the up and down cursor keys to be able to make minute adjustments to this, which is nice. So as I click up and down, it then moves by 1% at a time. So I can land it pretty much on the base there. Equally, I can click on the whites, and I can use the up and down cursor keys to be able to bring the brightest portions of the picture up or down. You can see as I bring down the brightness value, just to bring it in within that 0 to 100% there. If your picture is overexposed or underexposed, or you're looking for a certain visual style, for instance, if you want a particular clip to look like it's been shot more in the daytime rather than the evening, or equally more in the evening than the daytime, you could use the midtones to then make adjustments. So if I bring the midtones down, it then makes the middle portion of the picture a little bit darker, the middle portion of the brightness value is a little bit darker, therefore giving it more of an evening feel. Or if I bring it up, kind of gives more of a brighter feel for the midtones. I guess the ideal situation is to try and get a good balance across the whole waveform from 0 to 100. Now I've made my primary color correction, or now I've made my luminance adjustment, or expanded my contrast range. The next thing I may look at is the color, and again for the color tab I have 4 buttons again. I have a global button on the far left, I then have a black, a grey and a white to represent the shadow, the midtones and the highlights. And equally then, if I think, okay, the blacks for instance have maybe a little bit too much blue in them for instance, then I could take that slider and I can move it around this color board and increase or decrease the particular color value. And color grading, when you're looking at color, is an additive process. So for instance, if your picture is too yellow in the brightest portions of the picture, you would look to add the opposite color on the color spectrum. So the opposite of yellow is roughly around the blue area of the spectrum. So you would then start to move your whites button here towards the blues, and that would wash out the yellows, or counteract the yellows. But on here the color isn't too much of a problem, so that's fine. Now, as with all color correction, you should look at the before and after, and to do that I click back on this little arrow button here to take me back to the information board, and then I have the blue button to be able to turn on or turn off the color correction I've made, and that will allow me to check whether that is of any use or not. Now if I wanted to save this and apply it to multiple other clips, I click back on the arrow on the right of this color correction. Right down the bottom here I have a cog. If I click in it, you see there I already have some presets in there for certain styles: moonlight, fast sun, dusk, summer sun, that kind of stuff. But I can save a preset, so if I think, right, yeah, this is perfect for this particular project, I can call it project preset, and when I click OK, there it is in the list right down the bottom there. If then once I've made that adjustment I think, right, it's not right, I don't want it anymore, either I can then hide that color correction or disable the visibility of that color correction, or just over here I have this little hook arrow which is my reset correction. What that then allows me to do is if I click on that button, it resets the color and brightness information for that particular color correction back to the original footage.